We come together today because within us there is something that knows we need more than we can find alone. We know instinctively in the depths of ourselves that we need others for this journey of life, even though we also guard our independence and individuality. So let us celebrate all that makes us unique, yet all that makes us one, and let us dream dreams of all that we can do together. Come, let us worship.
Beyond the town where wildflowers grow, a rainbow and the cuckoo, Lord, how rich and great the times are now, how rich and great the times are now. That keep on staring, that I stand so long in grass that's wet from heavy rain. A rainbow and a cuckoo's song may never come together again, may never come this side the two. It feels like autumn, although the breeze is still. I feel the chill of autumn. Oh yes, it's autumn. It's always autumn. However green the hill, to me it still is autumn. I can feel the frost now that makes my spring and summer dreams seem lost now. I can the autumn haze recall the days of warm summer laughter that faded soon after in autumn, then left in autumn. And though another season's here, I feel the emptiness of autumn all the year. I can feel the frost now that makes my spring and summer dreams seem lost now. Why can't the autumn haze recall the days And though another season's here, I feel the emptiness of autumn all the year. Autumn, autumn.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Andrea Brown, my pronouns are they, them, and I am a worship associate here at UUCB. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to better welcome and care for one another. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you've come. And whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. This is deeply felt, and we commit our congregation to be in right relation with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. Please take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You may want to get a candle and a way to light it, so you can join in our chalice lighting at home. We light our chalice with a prayer adapted from the Reverend Teresa Soto. We come with words of grief, but also silent rage. We are trans and we are holy. We are intersex and we are sacred. We are gender diverse and we are divine. We know that justice is always on the side of the oppressed. Call the people to this place. Remind them that love is more than saying. Love is being and doing. Help us lift up the truth that each of us exist as a complete expression of humanity. And help us both to heal and to rise, a people marked by difference, but chosen by ourselves and each other to be known, to be recognized. Beloved and belonging, Unitarian Universalists. We are trans and we are holy. We are intersex and we are sacred. We are gender diverse and we are divine. For all of these things, we give thanks and say, Amen. Now, please join in singing our opening song, Answering the Call of Love. The words will be on screen.
The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide, and so every soul and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are answering the call of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love ties in bond. Corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Please join with me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. And I know you might have a heavy load, but I can carry some too. I will lift you up when they push you down. I will raise my voice and stand my ground. Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. Well, it looks like it might be a long night, but I ain't going nowhere. And I know it's gonna be a hard fight, but I will stay right here. I will shine a light in the darkest hour. I will face the man in the tallest tower. Well, it looks like it might be a long night, but I ain't going nowhere. I will work, I will fight, I will strive in the name of love. I will speak, I will shout, I will sing it to the skies above. Well, it looks like it might be a perilous climb, but I will follow your lead. And I know it might be a long time until the last one of us is free. But I will hold on tight, stay by your side. I will be with you for this whole damn ride. Well, it looks like it might be a perilous climb, but I will follow your lead. Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. And I know you might have a heavy load, but I can carry some too. I will lift you up
When they push you down, I will raise my voice and stand my ground. Well, it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you. I'm gonna walk it with you. I'm gonna walk it with you. I will walk, I will climb, I will shine my light the whole night through. Because it looks like it might be a hard road, but I'm gonna walk it with you.
For our story today, I'm going to share an abridged and retold version of a story that was published in Ms. Magazine the year of their debut. It was Lois Gould's X, A Fabulous Children's Story. Now, some adult readers were troubled by this story's willingness to question gender identity. And even though one critic was very vocal against it, they also managed to note that the story was less against sexist toys and gender roles and rather for all toys and roles. And they said kids' psyches shouldn't be stupidly restricted by these things. Of course, agreeing with this. But what is important as you listen to it is just to appreciate the fact that this was printed in the debut of Ms. Magazine, their debut year, which was, in fact, 49 years ago. So sit back and enjoy a retold version of X, A Fabulous Child's Story. Once upon a time, a baby named X was born. The baby was named X so that no one could tell whether they were a boy or a girl. Its parents could tell, of course, but they couldn't tell anybody else. They couldn't even tell baby X, at least not until much, much later. You see, this was all part of a very important secret scientific experiment officially known as Project Baby X. The smartest scientists had set up this experiment at the cost of exactly $23 billion and 72 cents. Exactly $23 billion and 72 cents. This might seem like a lot for one baby, even if it was a very super important scientific experiment. But, with the cost of strained carrots and stuffed animals and popcorn for the movies and diapers and clothes and pencils, and okay, we see how it all adds up. Besides, long before baby X was ever born, the smart scientists had to be paid to work out the secret details of the experiment and to write the official instruction manual, written in secret code, of course, who would be for baby X's parents, whoever they were. The parents had to be selected very, very carefully. Thousands of mothers and fathers volunteered, but then the scientists made them take thousands of tests and answer thousands of tricky questions. And almost everybody failed, except Mr. and Mrs. the Joneses, who wanted to raise a baby X more than any other kind of baby, no matter how much trouble it would be. Now, they had to make some promises. Ms. and Mr. Jones had to promise they would take equal turns caring for X, feeding X, and singing X lullabies. And they had to promise never to hire any babysitters, because the government scientists knew full well that a babysitter would probably peak because they would just have to know. The day the Joneses brought their baby home, lots of friends and relatives came over to see their baby. None of them knew about the secret experiment, though, because it was, secret. And the first thing they asked, you got it, is what kind of a baby X was. And when the Jones smiled and said, it's an X, no one knew what to say. They didn't want to say, look at her cute dimples. And they didn't want to say, look at his strong little biceps. Or they didn't feel right about just saying plain kitschy coo. So they just kind of thought the Joneses were playing a silly joke on them and all walked away. But of course, the Jones weren't joking. It's an X was absolutely all they would tell anyone. And for some reason, that made their friends and relatives very, very angry. The relatives felt embarrassed about having an X in the family. People think there's something wrong with it. There is something wrong with it. Nonsense, the Jones told them cheerfully. What could be possibly wrong with this perfectly adorable X? Nobody could answer that except baby X, who let out a rather loud burp. Clearly, nothing really was at all wrong, but folks still couldn't figure out what to make of it. The cousins who had sent a tiny football helmet would not come and visit anymore. The neighbors who had sent a pink flowered jumper pulled their shades down when the Joneses passed their house. Now, the official instruction manual had warned the new parents this would happen, so they didn't fret. Besides, they were really too busy being parents with a baby to really worry about that. Now, they had to be extra careful how they played with little X. They knew if they kept bouncing X in the air and saying how strong and active they were, they'd be treating it more like a boy. But if all they do was cuddle and kiss and tell X how sweet and dainty they were, they'd be treating X more like a girl. Of course, page 1654 of the instruction manual, the scientist prescribed plenty of bouncing and plenty of cuddling, both. X ought to be strong and sweet and active, but please just forget about dainty altogether. There were other problems too. Let's start with toys. On his first shopping trip, Mr. Jones told the store clerk, "I need some clothes and toys for my new baby." The clerk smiled. "Well, is your baby a boy or a girl?" "It's an X," Mr. Jones said, smiling back. But the clerk wasn't so amused or even understanding and said, "Well, in that case, I just can't help you," and walked off. So Mr. Jones wandered helplessly around the store, but everything in the store was piled up in sections for boys and girls. There were boys' pajamas and girls' underwear, and boys' fire engines and girls' housekeeping sets. So Mr. Jones went home with nothing. But the manual had help, specifically page 2364. Buy plenty of everything, it said. So they did. They bought plenty of all kinds of toys. They bought plenty of all kinds of clothes. And they also bought a storybook about a brave princess who rescued a handsome prince from his ivory tower. And another about a sister and brother who grew up to be a baseball star and a ballet star. But the book wouldn't tell you which one. Now, things kept on going and, problems kept on arising. By the time X grew big enough to play with other children, the Joneses' problems had grown bigger too. Once, a little girl grabbed X's shovel in the sandbox and zonked X in the head with it. Now, Tracy, that girl's mother said, little girls mustn't hit little... She turned to X. Are you a little boy or a little girl? Mr. Jones, sitting near the sandbox, held his breath and crossed his fingers. X smiled politely and said, I'm a little X. You're a what? You're a little BRAT is what you are. But, said X, little girls shouldn't hit little X's either. What good does hitting do anyways? Now, X's father, who was still holding his breath, finally let it out, although the girl and her mother stomped away. But as time went on, they came up with the next really big problem. X was going to start school. Now, the problem was schools are full of rules for boys and girls, and there were no rules around for X's. The teacher might tell the boys to form one line and the girls to form another. There'd be boys' games and girls' games and boys' secrets and girls' secrets. The school library might have a list of recommended books for boys and another list of recommended books for girls. And then, of course, the bathroom. One marked boys and one marked girls. So, first day of school required a big meeting of the scientists that were part of the secret experiment. Finally, everyone was ready. The Joneses helped X button on a nice new pair of red and white checked overalls. By the way, overalls don't fold one way for the girls or the other way for the boys, so you can't tell which. So overalls were just perfect for X. Sharpened pencils for X's nice new pencil box and marked X's name clearly on all of X's books in their nice new book bag. X brushed their teeth and combed their hair, which just about covered their ears, and was ready. Now, the Jones had asked X's teacher if the class could line up alphabetically instead of forming separate lines for boys and girls. Sure. They asked if X could use the principal's bathroom because it wasn't marked anything except bathroom. But nobody could help X with the biggest problem of all, the other children. and of course, their parents and guardians. No one in X's class had ever known an X before. No one had ever heard anyone say, my best friends are X's. So what would happen? What would the other children think? Would they make friends? Would they make Xist jokes? Yes, had to go there. So they couldn't tell. You couldn't look at X's clothes. You couldn't look at X's haircuts to try to put X into, of course, one of the categories you're trying to. It was very hard to tell by the games X liked to play. Either X played ball very well for a girl, or else X played house very well for a boy. Some of the children tried to find out by asking X tricky questions like, who's your favorite sports star? That was easy. X had two favorites, a girl jockey named Robin Smith and a boy archery champion named Robin Hood. What's your favorite TV program? That was even easier. X's favorite TV program was Lassie, which stars a girl dog who's played by a boy dog. Isn't it fabulous? And X's favorite toy was a doll. When X said their favorite toy was a doll, everyone decided X must be a girl. Until again, X said the doll was really a robot and that X had computerized it and it was programmed to bake fudge brownies and then clean up the kitchen. After that, no one really sure, and they gave up guessing what X was. The only thing they knew for sure is they really wanted to see that robot doll sometime. Now, X came home, real still wondering because they couldn't tell and they really weren't sure what to make of X. And they checked the manual, and under other children, here's what it said. What do you expect? The other children obey all these silly boy-girl rules because their parents taught them. Lucky X, you don't have to stick to the rules at all. All you have to do is be yourself. P.S. We didn't say it'd be easy. So, the next morning, after sleeping on it, X felt better, went back to school with a brave smile, clean pair of red and white checked overalls. There was a 7-letter word spelling bee in class, and a 7-lap boys relay race in the gym, and a 7-layer cake baking contest in the girls' kitchen corner. X won the spelling bee. X won the relay race. And X almost won the baking contest, except they forgot to light the oven. Which only proves that nobody's perfect. One of the other children noticed something else. X doesn't care about winning, and X doesn't care about losing. X thinks it's fun playing boys' stuff and girls' stuff. Come to think of it, maybe X is having twice as much fun as the rest of us. So then, things began to change. The girl who beat X at the baking contest gave X a slice of cake. The boy who beat X in the relay race asked X to race him home. And then, even more started to happen. Susie, who sat next to X in class, suddenly refused to wear pink dresses to school anymore. She insisted on wearing red and white checked overalls, just like X's. Because overalls, she said, are better for climbing the monkey bars. And then Jim, the football class nut, started wheeling his little sister's doll carriage around the football field. He'd put on his entire football uniform, except for the helmet. He put the helmet in the carriage and wheeled it around the field. And when asked about it, he says, well, X does it, and X is the team quarterback, so it must be fine. The worst came with the twins, Joe and Peggy. Peggy started using Joe's hockey skates and his microscope. And then Joe started using Peggy's needlepoint kit and her cookbooks. Peggy started to run the lawnmower, and Joe started to run the vacuum cleaner. However, the problem then shifted not to the other children, but to their parents. They weren't pleased with Peggy's wonderful biology experiments or with Joe's terrific needlepoints. They all were just furious. And you know what? It was all X's fault. So something had to be done. They said, we have to make the Joneses tell us if X is a boy or a girl, and then X will start following the rules. The Joneses wouldn't do it. So therefore, the Parents Association called in the scientists, a group of impartial scientists, for an examination. And they said, we'll go with what this examination says, because the examination will solve this and tell everyone if X is a boy or a girl. Now, everyone was nervous. coming up on the day of the examination. The Joneses were nervous. The kids were nervous. They liked X. What's going to happen? The parents were nervous because they didn't like X. What's going to happen? The only one who wasn't all that nervous was X. So the day came. Now, through it all, everyone was waiting outside the door. Through it all, you could hear the impartial team of experts' voices asking hundreds of questions and X's voice answering hundreds of questions. The whole thing took so long that everyone knew it must be the most complete examination everyone had to take. Poor X, the Joneses thought. Serves X right, the parents' committee thought. I wouldn't like to be in X's overalls right now, the children thought. At last, the door opened. Everyone crowded in to hear the results. X didn't look any different. In fact, X was smiling. The impartial team of experts, well, they looked terrible. They looked confused. Some might have even been crying. What happened? Had X done something disgraceful? Did X flunk the test? Or just the most important part? Oh dear. Shh, shh. The experts are trying to speak. The lead expert cleared their voice and said, in our opinion here, young X's, yes, shh, yes, what is it? In our opinion, young X here is just about the least mixed up child we have ever examined. And then the experts walked out. Yay for X, cried the children. Now, but the parents were confused. How could X have passed the entire examination? Didn't X have an identity problem? X wasn't mixed up? X wasn't one kind of a misfit? What was going on? Actually, finally, they stopped crying, the experts did, and were smiling politely. Don't you see? We're crying because it's a wonderful X. It's wonderful that X has no identity problem. X isn't one bit mixed up. As for being a misfit, ridiculous. X knows perfectly well what X is, don't you? But what is X? We all want to know. And they smiled and said, yes, perhaps, in time, perhaps. Needless to say, the Joneses were happy. Project Baby X scientists were pleased too. So were all the other children. Parent Association wasn't, but they'd promised to go with what the experts said, so they were kind of stuck. Later that day, all X's friends put on, now they all had them too, their red and white checked overalls and went over to X's house to see X. They found X in the backyard, playing with a tiny baby none of them had ever seen before. The baby was wearing very, very tiny red and white checked overalls. How do you like our new baby? X asked the other children. It's got cute dimples, said Jim. It's got husky little biceps, said Susie. What kind of a baby is it? Asked the children. X frowned at them. Can't you tell? Then X broke out into a great big grin. It's a Y. And there's the fabulous story of X, which, as I reminded you, was published 49 years ago, which we'll talk about more later in the service, about many gender and gender identity and gender pronoun issues that have a much deeper and longer history than many of us may have realized.
We now enter into the time of our service that we make for our hearts and spirits, for our cares and concerns for one another. We lift up and hold the joys and sorrows and cares and concerns and challenges that we each may be facing. During our time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own in the comments. I invite us all to hold these cares in the compassionate embrace of this loving community. I will now share with you the words of Alex Capitan, Meditation on Opposites. Spirit of the universe, life force that flows through all beings, power beyond all knowing, we ask you to help us see beyond our dependence on opposites, to transcend our desire to know who is like us and who is not. Open us to the knowledge that in this room there are complexities and diversities of identities, beyond black and white, old and young, man and woman, poor and rich, educated and uneducated, disabled and able-bodied, gay and straight, ill and healthy, wrong and right, broken and whole. In this room, there are people who embody juxtaposition, who can tell stories written on their bodies about both and neither, who carry intimate pieces of the truth that there is no such thing as opposites. Spirit of many names and of no name at all, help us find release from our belief that all things must be either or, this belief that walls us off from one another, ensnaring us in a battle of same versus different. Help us to open our minds, to deeply listen and truly know one another, finally glimpsing the kaleidoscope beauty of the divine. Now, let us join in singing number 23, Bring Many Names.
Let me tell you the start of my story about gender. This is a story with 100 beginnings, and I'm only going to share a few. When I was a kid, I would lie on my back, stare down at my chest, and hope it stayed flat. I knew how excited other people were about their bodies' changes, and I wanted nothing to do with that. As I got older and my chest developed, the adults around me hissed that I needed to wear a bra, needed to hide my body. And I felt shame. Shame for something I wanted nothing to do with. When I was another age, some friends convinced me to stop wearing baggy clothes and try new things. I saved some money and they took me out, trying on clothes, teaching me how to put together, how to play with an outfit. And I felt joy, a joy of composition and creation. When I was a different age, a friend explained that he was taught to always let women win an argument, simply because they were women. And I felt frustration. Frustration because I wanted to win, because I was making the better points, not because somebody refused to fight. Frustration because he refused to engage me, the real me, and could only interact with the construction of gender roles that lived inside his head. When I was another age, I decided I was done with gender. And I was going to transform into strict androgyny. Everything about me would be perfectly unreadable to a stranger. It would be impossible for someone to gender me, to impose their expectations, their views on my body. And I felt exhaustion. At first, this new style was delightful because I was breaking expectations. But the more I did it, the more it just became another box to fit in. When I was a different age, I was going to my first professional conference, and I didn't know how to present myself. A friend took me out, helped me find the appropriate professional clothing, and I felt safe. Safe because I imagined fitting in so well that I would be visible only for my actions and the small joys of composition my friend helped me see. But safety is a habit that turns into a trap. When I was another age, I found someone in a queer space joking that there were only two types of genderqueer style: androgynous and glorious rule breaking. It clicked that the second was the right one for me, and I felt desire. Desire to throw away the rules of gender, throw away the rules of safety, and embrace the joy of creation. When I was a different age, I told people at work that I used they, them pronouns, that the label people assigned me at birth was wrong. All my life, gender had been a box people put me in, and I was done with it. I've always named myself genderless or agender. Now I was just sharing those names. Mostly it was good. And then there was one person who had power over me on a project, and they misgendered me. If you're cis, someone who is comfortable with the gender box that you were assigned at birth, Perhaps someone looking at your body and saying they refuse to see you. They will just turn you into the roles that fit the size of their small imagination. Perhaps it's not so bad. Other people have a solution to being constantly squished and shoved into that box, and their solution is to build a bigger box. But for me, that box is a coffin, and I want nothing to do with it. They, them pronouns are new. So at first, being misgendered was a small thing, a paper cut, perhaps even a mistake. I asked them again to use they, them, but they kept using the wrong pronouns. Slicing and slicing, a cheese grater against my skin. Pieces of me disappearing until I was cut down to the size of their box. And I felt anger. Anger because here was someone who previously said they cared about people, respected people. But that was true only as long as they didn't have to try a word that tasted strange. Try to be a little uncomfortable. I did not try to be gentle when they no longer had power over me and they misgendered me again. One last age. The age that I am when I say the words, "We welcome you in the fullness of who you are." I know it's not always true. I know we mess up, and I'm not just talking about misgendering and unfunny jokes about pronouns. It's race and class and ability and so many other ways we cut each other. But I also get to say we are always trying to welcome and care for one another better. Because we don't shove. We don't want to shove each other into the boxes that are wrong. We reach out. We reach towards one another, towards the people we are becoming. When I say those words, it feels like coming home. Our stories are not finished. They begin again. May we always work to welcome and care for one another better. May we reach out towards each other, towards our full selves, and towards the joy of play and composition. May we create ourselves into the people we are becoming. May it be so, and blessed be.
A while back, there was an anthropologist who did a long study on a particular island. See, the people in that island community had 17 different gender identities represented, and the anthropologist wanted to take a good long look at it. So he visited for a long time, the way that anthropologists tend to do, and then he wrote up his findings, the way that anthropologists, tend to do. He wrote extensively on all of the different gender identities and gender expressions they had, but then concluded that despite seeing all of that in reality and in action, that he concluded that there were still only two gender identities present. What a waste of a wonderful opportunity. Okay, and I have several other thoughts for that anthropologist, but I'll keep them to myself for the moment. Gender identities, how we talk about gender and gender identities and gender pronouns are all current, complex issues, and they are all surprisingly old and global as well. While it does seem that they have entered mainstream conversation in more recent years, the truth is that they have been parts of mainstream consideration and conversation for a lot longer than that. I'm glad that they are finally getting sensitively considered, though, in greater degrees of equality and justice, although there is still a long ways to go in that regard. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we get into details and complexities in history, we need to start with some overall concepts and terminology. Gender identity is a core part of our perceived identity. That is the way the world sees us. It has been said that when you see someone on the street or some other similar situation, that there are three identities that we immediately make judgments and identifications on. Got any guesses what the three are? Age, race, and gender. Age, race, and gender. Now, each of these has their own complexities, but this is rather telling about us humans. The things that our brains and our perceptions make snap judgments about other people are those three things: age, race, and gender. And this means our brains have usually been trained to have categories for each of these things, and they, meaning our brains, run into tension or anxiety when someone doesn't fit into those categories or is difficult to classify. Now, I'm not saying those are true for all of us or for each and every one of us, but it is the way that human brains generally function. And it is one of the sources for so much tension and pushback when those categories are challenged or ambiguous in any way. Think back to the story about little X from earlier. Right from the moment that X came home with the Joneses, their family members and neighbors couldn't reconcile the fact that X didn't fit into a binary gender category, that of being identified as either male or female, the binary. And when X went to school, the other children were anxious because of X not being in one of those categories and tried to trick X into identifying which binary they belonged in. I love that in the story, fairly quickly, the other kids gave up trying to categorize X and decided that X was having, twice the fun because they were enjoying things in both cultural gender categories. And I totally love the image of the rest of X's class all showing up at their house wearing gender-neutral red and white checkered overalls. But the reaction of the parents and the Parents Association is really not all that surprising. The fact that X didn't fit into a category was too much for them to reconcile in the story. And I'm in no way saying that adults are less understanding and flexible than kids. This is just how the story goes. But that is also the way it's played out in reality many times. When I've watched friends going through gender identity transitions, largely it's their friends and peers who are far faster to respect and accept their identity and pronouns and name them than their parents and older relatives. In fact, what I've seen more frequently than not is that when a friend shares that they are transgender, the most frequent response is, well, we already knew that. We were just waiting for you to tell us. And gender identity exploration is becoming nearly as commonplace as affectional orientation exploration in some groups and geographies of teenagers. But okay, back to the terminology because I've gotten ahead of myself again. But given that I have good friends and family members in various stages of gender transition and gender neutrality, and given that gender transition and gender queer and trans identities put someone at much higher risk for violence, either other or self-inflicted, these are important issues to me, so I can get going on them. Okay, terminology. There's the trans set of words: trans, transgender, transsexual, male to female trans, female to male trans, and others as well. Then there are a variety of gender neutral terms, starting with gender neutral, genderqueer, no space, or sometimes a space, and plenty of others. There's intersex, which means someone who is born with both male and female anatomy. And that's not as rare as you'd think. It's something like 1 out of every 1,000 births. And a term that someone recently told me they had only just looked up: cisgender, CIS gender, which means someone who identifies with the gender identity that their anatomy matched at the time of their birth. There's a concept that you may have heard, whether or not you knew what it meant. It was also the talk of the UU General Assembly this past June, and not in a good way. The concept is dead naming, another important concept for us to know. That's when someone uses a former name for someone who has transitioned in some way. That name is for their past self, their dead self, hence dead name. It happened in one of the big worship services at General Assembly, when folks who have progressed to a stage of fellowship and ministry, or in credentialing as a religious educator or music director, are named and formally recognized. Through whatever chain of events happened in the making of that service, some folks had former names and not their current names that were broadcast in that super important and super public stage. They were dead named. Which, by the way, is terminology that the word processor I'm using hasn't caught on to yet, since it's telling me that dead named isn't grammatically correct. Yet another type of evolution in our linguistics. So at the General Assembly, there were both apologies made, but also a great deal of conversation and awareness raising by all present, which I felt like was good progress in seeing and understanding some of the challenges that trans folks face. Now, there are a variety of different letter combinations you might hear aside from just LGBT. One of the longer ones is LGBTIQQ, and the first several times that I saw it, I had to look it up. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, and questioning. And sometimes there's an A added on to the end of it for allies. One of the current versions is LGBTQ star, which adds queer and the star for other identifications. And you know, given that there is all sorts of evolving terminology, it is totally okay to not know what an acronym means or a word means. Sometimes I might ask, but usually I'll pull out my phone or another online search engine and just look it up. There is absolutely no shame in doing that. In fact, looking up things when you don't understand them is good allyship. Now, aside from terminology and vocabulary type words, there's also the question of pronouns, a question that's been around for a lot longer than I realized. I thought it was a more current thing. It's actually not. In the story of X that I retold earlier, which was first published 49 years ago, while I tried to switch the pronoun to they throughout the story in my retelling, that actually wasn't the way it was originally written. The story was written naming X as it. Maybe that was more okay at the time, but I just couldn't do that to X. It is demeaning and dehumanizing, and those are the reasons why it is really not in use today as a gender-neutral pronoun. In fact, the use of it as a gender-neutral pronoun in American English didn't ever get much use except for the purpose of dehumanization. For instance, and this is sad to say, but this is a part of our history. For instance, it was used for human beings in decrees and writings about slaves and other folks the writer was specifically trying to put down. The search for gender-neutral pronouns and the search for pronouns appropriate for folks' gender identities has been around for a while. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about this here, given that, hey, we're in liberal Berkeley, well, in the poll from the opening task force that we had last month, or 2 months ago now, when the demographic question of gender, which, by the way, was presented in the most open and universal form possible, with an open blank for folks to fill in that survey, given the number of sarcastic comments that were entered into that blank instead of the respondent's gender, I knew this was something that we need to talk about and work on here. How we identify our gender and how we talk about our gender are indeed deep things. And not only that, but how we talk about gender in general and the words we use, whether they're inclusive or exclusive or neutral or non-assuming, is a big deal. It was a big deal when women started to use the prefix Ms. rather than Miss or Mrs., since they didn't want their marital status to be the first part of their identity, or assumed they would change their last name upon marriage, and other reasons too. And then there's a newer prefix that is moving into greater use, MX, pronounced mix. That's the gender neutral version of those prefixes. And of course, as openness to different ways we name ourselves comes more into the mainstream, so too does resistance, just like the sarcasm in our own poll. When United Airlines announced they were adding mix to their booking options, saying people could now fly the way they identify, some customers replied, literally saying things like, "I now identify as a carry-on bag and will fly for free on your airline." And of course, nonviolent passive-aggressive responses are not the only version of pushback, which folks in the trans community know, as well as many other communities, know quite well, and we would all do to remember and renew our attention and allyship to. But let's go back to pronouns. The search for more pronouns for folks to be able to better identify themselves with has been long, as has the search for a truly inclusive, gender-neutral pronoun. So here are some actually rather surprising parts of that history. Starting in the 18th century, so by the way, that is the 1700s, a few adventurous souls thought the best way to deal with the missing gender-neutral pronoun would be to invent one. More than 200 pronouns were invented, most of them before the 1970s, and many of them before 1900. 2 gender-neutral pronouns, THON and HEER, even made it into major dictionaries at the time. An article in the Springfield Republican in 1896 claimed that the ordinary folk had already found a solution to the missing word, 1896. Instead of the generic, this editor mandated by grammarians that it was they, which the article claimed at least 2 men out of 3 and 4 women out of 5 already use they, with sublime contempt for singular pronoun grammar rules. And in contrast, Francis Brewster coined ES, and MEM in 1841, and Charles Crozat Converse announced thon and thons, THON and THONS, in 1884. Neither set of pronouns became standard, though neither has really entirely disappeared either. So calling pronouns like Z and here new pronouns or neopronouns is frankly misleading because the words are relatively old. Z appeared in 1864, announced only by someone with the initials JWL, and here HIR first popped up a century ago, invented or at least introduced to readers in California by the editor of the Sacramento Bee in 1920. Even legal documents have started to catch up. California amended our Constitution in 1974 to replace gendered words with gender-neutral language. As the proposition that did it, Prop 11, explained, instead of referring to the governor as he, the amendment repeats the word governor. And such measures can actually have a broad impact. A 1986 Minnesota bill to make all statutes gender neutral by instead repeating job titles and other nouns promised to eliminate a total of more than 20,000 pronouns from the state's law books. But there is still much progress to be made. It takes time for linguistic changes and really linguistic shifts to happen. We may forget, we may make a mistake, like in misnaming a pronoun or inadvertently dead-naming someone, and thus perpetuate one of 1,000 microaggressions that trans folks face. And there are still words that are needed, like my own search for a gender-neutral word to name my relationship to my sister's child. Niece and nephew are both inherently gender-specific and don't fit them anymore. Now, we are making progress at UUCB. The bathrooms by the atrium are now both all gender bathrooms. And once we get the signs installed, the rest of the ones in the main building will be too. With Breeze, our new church database system, you'll get to name your pronouns that you wish to use at the church right in your record, and those will be printed on your name tag. And go ahead and start naming those if you don't already in our gatherings and our meetings, as many folks do alongside their name on Zoom. Now, some of these things might be elementary for you, or they might be new or newer things, but they are steps, and we can all make steps. As a people, we can do better in our allyship and in our support and in our understanding and acceptance of folks with gender identities that differ from the norm, whatever that norm may be. This is justice work, it's compassion work, it's equality work, and it is spiritual work. And it is important work to be done and for many, many folks in our community and in our world. And I hope that you can join me in this vital, important awareness and justice work. May it be so.
As we commit together to making this a loving community, we take time to remember that we reach towards people beyond ourselves. Each week, half of our offerings are shared with a Good Neighbor organization who needs our financial support. This month, our Good Neighbor is the Greater Richmond Interfaith Alliance, or GRIP. GRIP operates the only family shelter in the East Bay. One time, my partner Bill and I served and shared a meal with people there. I remember a shy child peering up from behind their grandfather. I remember a trio of boys playing games with Bill where he hold his hand this high or this high, and they try to jump and touch it while their mother looked on in amused exhaustion. I remember their comments about liking GRIP more than the tent they were living in before. In addition to family shelter, GRIP offers food, showers, mailboxes, veteran housing, and case management and more to support people and eradicate homelessness. Details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as our offertory begins. Thank you so much for any value of offerings. Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. It's been so good being together today. Before we shift to our coffee hour on Zoom, please check out all the things that are available in our congregation by exploring our website, uucb.org. There, you can find a link to News in the Week Ahead, our weekly email newsletter, which includes a list of activities, announcements, and contact information. And as we prepare to leave the worship service, here are a few things to note. First, the Good Neighbor program is such an important part of UUCB's connections to the wider community. Are you familiar with any nonprofits in Alameda or Contra Costa County that might need some recognition and a monetary boost? We need your help to identify local nonprofits who might benefit from our donations. Please see the week ahead for contact information. The deadline is October 31st. Second, UUCB is looking for a few more people to join the team of Coffee Hour hosts. Hosting or co-hosting Coffee Hour is a great opportunity to use your skills, learn some new ones, and support our community. We'll provide all the training and support you need. For more information, see, as always, the week ahead. Now, please join in singing our closing song, one of my favorites. We are a gentle, angry people. The words will be on your screen.
We
And now may the blessings of life be upon us and upon this congregation. May the memories we gather here give us hope for the future. May the love that we share bring joy and strength to our hearts, and the peace of this community be with us until we are together again. And remember, as you go about your week, as you go about everything that you are doing, remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.